morning. It's great to be at CPAC once again. All of you who are here today are the same people who are truly at the heart of this movement. The mainstream media has pronounced the death of the Tea Party and the conservative cause. But looking at you this morning, I'm convinced that the supposed demise of this movement is just wishful thinking from the left. I hope you're ready for the next stage when we restore constitutionally limited government. Are you ready for next? I'm here to tell you that next is now, and a better tomorrow for America begins at CPAC today, right now. Let me tell you a little bit about who is next. I've been looking across the country for constitutional conservatives who share our values. And so far, I've endorsed Senate candidates like Ted Cruz in Texas, Jeff Flake in Arizona, Don Stenberg in Nebraska, and Dan Bongino in Maryland. Today, here at CPAC, I'm pleased to announce two new nominations, two new endorsements, Sarah Steelman in Missouri and Clark Durant in Michigan. I recently spoke to a group of farmers in my home state of Utah, and at the end of my remarks, they kindly presented me with a big shovel, suggesting that I'd need it because there's a whole lot of, well, how do I say this to a family-friendly audience, stuff to shovel in Washington. This got me thinking about my first year in office and the business of shoveling busily inside the Beltway. After running on a platform aimed at restoring constitutionally limited government, and joining the conservative movement that swept the nation in 2010, I showed up 404 days ago to the work site known as the United States Senate as a freshman with my sleeves rolled up, excited and ready to work. Upon my arrival here, I was immediately a little taken aback by the fact that there were two separate crews that I saw working. Those in the first crew were shoveling feverishly at the bottom of an ever-deepening and ever-widening hole of debt, deficit spending, expanding government, and endless regulation. They were digging as fast as they could, which of course only put them and the entire nation only deeper and deeper inside the hole. The second crew consisted of just a few people working outside the hole, trying their best to fill it up, or at least to get those inside to slow down their endless, mindless, senseless, and harmful digging. There's an old saying, when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. Well, we're $15 trillion in debt, and it is time to stop digging. I remember as a kid, we'd dig holes in the sand and tell each other we were going to dig holes all the way to China. Well, with a $15 trillion debt and an ever-expanding government, this president's trying to prove that it is in fact possible to dig a hole all the way to China. I quickly recognized when I got here that there were some major challenges to stopping this mother of all big dig projects. First, I realized that shovel-ready had nothing to do with job creation or, in fact, building the economy. It simply meant that Congress and the President were shovel-ready to dig the country and our future deeper and deeper into that big hole. The second challenge I discovered, to my shock and horror, was that Jim DeMint, Rand Paul, and I were not the only ones who got to vote in the U.S. Senate. Sad but true. You see, there are a large number of shovel-wielding, deficit-deepening hole diggers here in Washington. I did, of course, take courage as I found fellow freshmen like Marco Rubio, Ron Johnson, and Pat Toomey on site, suited up and ready to make a difference. Now, I've been disgusted to find many of the established Washington hole diggers believing that there are no constitutional limits on federal power. They actively work to increase the size of government and the ability it has to interfere into our day-to-day lives. Last year, for the very first time, our national debt grew larger than our entire economy. Our annual deficit is predicted to top $1 trillion for the fourth consecutive year. And sadly, unemployment remains a fact of life for nearly 13 million Americans. We must recognize that It is impossible for us to lift others up when we're standing in the bottom of a hole. This president and the Democratic leadership in Congress tell us that the economy is good enough now. In fact, they call this what we're in, a recovery. Good enough? I'm here to tell you that for Americans, good enough simply isn't. But the president and his allies tell us that in order to get the economy moving, we need to double down on our hole digging and spend more, borrow more, tax more, and regulate more. They say that we can do all this without developing domestic energy, without capital investment, and without market competition. This isn't true. And so I say, Mr. President, put down the shovel. Step away from the shovel. Our founding fathers instituted strong constitutional limits on government power because, as they saw it, every time the government acts, it does so at the expense of our own individual liberty. Even the enumerated powers of the federal government exist within a system of checks and balances, requiring that the three co-equal branches of government share certain authorities. So it's no surprise that the supporters of big government are also the very first to ignore the Constitution. Now, I don't have time today, nor do I have a shovel big enough to talk about the rat hole of recess appointments or the pit of presidential power grabs. I'd need a bulldozer for that one, so we'll have to save these topics for another day. Needless to say, the government hole diggers would like nothing more than to disregard the parameters that ensure that we have a government that respects life and liberty and property, the hallmarks of what conservatives stand for. This governing structure is rooted in the unassailable notion that liberty is preferable to tyranny. The founding generation understood that liberty is more likely to exist, and with it prosperity, where the government is limited in its own hole-digging activities. We must place limits on how Congress spends and borrows money through a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. This kind of amendment to the Constitution is really the only way to impede this perpetual cycle of hole digging. You'll be shocked to learn that not everyone agrees that we need a balanced budget amendment. People like to say that Congress already has the power to balance the budget. Members of Congress, they say, just need to do their jobs. Well, I ask, how is that working out for you? Is it good enough? It's not nearly good enough because the fact is they don't. Congress will not stop digging or cut spending or balance its budget on its own. I know because I've tried. Last year, for example, I sponsored a bill called the Cut, Cap, and Balance Act. This legislation would have forced Congress to stop digging and put down the shovels once and for all. The American people, according to a source no more conservative than CNN, overwhelmingly supported Cut, Cap, and Balance. And the House passed this bill. But what did the Democrats in the Senate do? They couldn't put the shovel down. Cut, Cap, and Balance was the only piece of legislation considered in both houses of Congress that would have put us permanently on the path toward balancing our budget, toward fiscal responsibility. And what do you think the Democrats did with it when they got to the Senate? They killed it. Then last November, I proposed a measure that would have simply frozen federal spending in certain categories at current levels. Technically, this isn't even a cut, although reducing growth in spending is what typically passes for a cut in Washington. Far from putting the shovel down, this bill simply required the President and Congress to just lean on their shovels for a little while. Unfortunately, even that turned out to be too difficult for the Senate Democrats, and the measure failed. Now the President says he wants to cut. Let's just say I'm a little skeptical of proposals that promise to nibble around the edges over a 10-year period. The more he talks about cutting, while at the same time offering no details, the more I start to wonder what exactly he might be shoveling. We cannot continue to spend trillions of dollars we don't have on programs we can't afford. That's a path toward a true pit of despair. The only way to guarantee that Congress will do what's necessary is to amend the Constitution and require Congress once and for all to follow and abide by the simple rules of mathematics. Now, the way we actually get out of that hole and start building the future that Americans desire is to get the federal government out of the way of the people and the entrepreneurs and the businesses that drive our economy, create jobs, and make this country great. Did you know that last year, the Federal Register, which is the government's laundry list of new and updated federal regulations, totaled 82,419 pages of federal rules that can, will, and do intrude upon every aspect of our lives. From the property we own, to the cars we drive, to the light bulbs in our lamps, there's very little the federal government doesn't regulate or otherwise restrict. Now, they even tried to tack a special fee on Christmas trees last year. Christmas trees is nothing sacred. I suppose I do have to pause here to give some credit to the Obama administration, though, for actually using the word Christmas. All this interference comes at a very high price, which not only reduces our liberty, but also contributes to our ever-deepening spending and debt problems. Along with ratifying a balanced budget amendment, we should work immediately and vigorously to restore federalism and limit the government's activities to only those enumerated in Article 1, Section 8, and elsewhere in the Constitution. And leave all other matters at state and local government levels where they properly belong and can be dealt with most effectively. This new movement that we've all worked so hard to create, you can call it the Tea Party, you can call it constitutional conservatism, you can call it whatever you want. It's given me hope that we can turn things around and get our country out of this hole. My friends, this is a call to return to constitutionally limited government, to restore the proper balance between liberty and government action, and to renew our country's commitment to federalism. As we get Washington to set down the federal shovel through a balanced budget amendment, we will jumpstart our economy. We'll create job growth. We'll experience the kind of prosperity that has made America the greatest civilization the world has ever known. America is not destined to become a decaying city in a hole, but rather a shining city on a hill. It's time for members of Congress to lay down their shovels, to walk away from their hole-digging hell, to turn their backs on the freedom-burying budget deficits, burdensome regulations, and blatant disregard for the Constitution, and climb out of the hole in order to continue building that shining city on a hill that our founding fathers established. Let us commit right here, right now, to this cause of freedom, the cause of liberty, and the noble cause of constitutionally limited government, so that future generations can stand not in a hole, but on higher ground, and see for themselves the kind of prosperity and endless possibilities our founding fathers intended for every American. Thank you. May God bless the United States of America.